morning, everyone. Thank you for coming here and joining me at the airport. I like to, share some thoughts with you before the week and the legislative week begins in Washington, and we've been, enjoying these opportunities to talk to you before I head off to Washington for the week. There's a lot going on right now in our country, and the southern border is 2,000 miles away from where we are here in Buffalo, but this crisis has reached our backyard and our state like never before. I've long said that every state is a border state because of the impact of the border crisis, but it's state lines at this point are meaningless because of the mobile nature of what's going on. Since President Biden took office, more than 6 million people have entered the United States illegally. The expiration of Title 42 several weeks ago, combined with the state's sanctuary city and state policies, have made New York a magnet for illegal immigration. Now, here in New York, according to the governor, who I've spoken with about this matter, and the New York City mayor, it's estimated that around 70,000 migrants have come here to New York State. Now, everything we have been long warning has come to fruition in this process. Now, Democratic legislators, they are seeing the consequences in real time of their open border policies that started at the beginning of the Biden administration. Yet President Biden and so-called border czar, Vice President Kamala Harris, and Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas, they twiddle their thumbs while Rome burns. This is a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions. And our upstate communities do not have the resources. They do not have the infrastructure to deal with huge influxes of migrants who need shelter, food, medical care, and education. Our upstate communities are already struggling to survive, and they simply don't have the capacity to fund, house, feed, and school thousands of migrants. Yet that's exactly what we see coming out of the mayor of the city of New York. Many of the migrants, we don't have a record of their vaccinations. Now, meanwhile, we were firing nurses that were so desperately needed because they refused to get a vaccination. Issues like polio, measles, hepatitis, those vaccinations are all in question on this population. This could lead to further public health outbreak. And our hospitals that I talk to each and every week are at bankruptcy levels in some cases. This has gotten so out of hand that it has now become a bipartisan issue where county executives on both sides of the aisle are issuing executive orders. This is no way to run our country. We need a secure border to put a stop to a system that rewards cartels and traffickers, both human and drug, and punishes people who try to come here illegally, and rewards people that go through our legal immigration system. We need to stop the flow of deadly fentanyl across our borders. We need to restore law and order and support our Border Patrol agents who are being pushed to the brink. Now, House Republicans just 2 weeks ago passed a comprehensive border package, H.R. 2. This is the solution to stopping the free-for-all that is hurting our country, and frankly, not any good for the migrants who get here and have nowhere to go and no way to support themselves. What we have now is chaos. What we need is control in law and order. It shouldn't be a Republican or a Democratic issue because it affects everyone. And if they haven't woken up yet to see how broken this current system is, then people just aren't paying attention. For the last 3 years, we've heard from this administration that they're in total denial that this is a problem. And they've been resting on the fact that most people outside of those who live along the border haven't seen the impact up close and personal. Those days are gone. Every state with a major city is dealing with this right now because the state of Texas, and you can't blame them, ask the migrants where they want to go. They're saying New York, Chicago, and LA. And they're transporting them to those states that have sanctuary policies that say they weren't going to enforce U.S. immigration law. We need action from the White House. The president's got to get real about this crisis, and we need that action now. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We can answer anything else by in Q&A. There's another serious issue on the horizon that you see on every national news station, and I know our local stations are covering it as well. and is the fact that we need the president to take action on, and this is the looming debt ceiling deadline. Now, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is saying that anywhere from June 1st to the middle of June is when the nation will reach our debt ceiling and the end of our emergency measures that are being in place, and we will be unable to meet America's obligations and could perhaps default on American debt. Everyone agrees that we need to get this deal in place, but not everyone is acting in good faith to negotiate. It's very quite simple. We have $31 trillion in a national debt right now. $31 trillion. The debt service on $31 trillion in the next 10 years is $10 trillion that this country will pay in credit card interest. Think of that. What waste of taxpayer money that we're going to spend $10 trillion in interest payments. We've spent $5 trillion in new spending in the last 3 years alone. We're on a path to a $1.5 trillion budget deficit next year. These numbers aren't sustainable, and thankfully the American people agreed and they voted to balance our federal government and elect a House Republican majority who made a strong commitment that we would rein in federal spending. Now, President Biden and Senate Democrats, they don't like it. They don't have to like it, but that's what the American people wanted. And we have an obligation to follow through on the promises that we ran on. The plan that we passed, now the House Republicans in the majority is the only entity at the table, from the Senate to the President to the House. We're the only ones that have actually passed legislation to raise the debt ceiling. And we had a plan. Both the President and the Senate said, we won't negotiate until we see your plan. Well, our plan is called Limit, Save, Grow, and we passed it through the House several weeks ago at this point. We're limiting the rate of growth. And there's no reason why the federal government can't spend at the same level they did last December. You could do it in your household budget. You could do it in your business's budget. We could live within our means, and that's what we can afford. Now, we can save billions by clawing back unused COVID funds, not funds that have been sent to the state for infrastructure projects, but funds that statutorily can't even be used anymore. Up to $60 billion of those exist across federal departments, money that's stashed away, and their programs have expired because President Biden signed an end to the pandemic. That will allow us to save money by not paying interest on money that wasn't spent in the first place. We also can save a lot of money by putting modest work requirements for social welfare benefits that won't affect seniors, people with disabilities, or parents with dependent children. This is something that, as I travel around my district, people have been crying for a very long time, that they would like to see a generous hand up, but not a permanent dependency on our government. The public's overwhelmingly supportive of these measures. That even President Biden supported social welfare work requirements in the 90s. These were Bill Clinton's plans. This was the Clinton agenda. And grow. We need to grow the economy. Unleash American energy and repeal costly regulations that are driving inflation. Limit, save, and grow. In our H.R. 1, our House energy bill, is rolled into our package. These are all proposals that the American people support. Yet President Biden and others that are whispering in his ear, they are so addicted to spending money at very record speed, and they're so beholden to the far left, he refuses to make modest changes and reforms. It is just pure insanity. We can't keep on this path. We're bankrupting our country with debt, and our children's children won't have the opportunity to see that debt paid off. This is the moment that we have to make these changes, to get the country's trajectory back on the right track, to start living within our means again, and correct the course that's in front of us. Republicans can't be any clearer. We are not going to raise the debt limit without putting controls on government spending. Period, full stop, end of story. We've said it since the beginning. Then we went and did our work. The Senate has dithered and done nothing, and the President refuses to come to the table with clean hands. President Biden is so unwilling to negotiate that he's now threatening to use the 14th Amendment to raise the debt ceiling. And even Janet Yellen said that would be just a marketing ploy. This is purely unconstitutional. It would cause an economic catastrophe. The 14th Amendment gives the President no authority to raise the debt ceiling. And the American people are sick of fear-mongering and political games. They need action. They've lied to the seniors in my district. They've lied to veterans in my district, saying that we proposed massive cuts. We haven't cut a dollar. An imaginary, fictional 10 years from now money that Joe Biden is pledging to spend after he will be long gone from the White House. We've talked about slowing the growth of federal spending, freezing our current spending at December 2022 levels, and then raising discretionary spending by 1% a year for the next decade. That would save nearly $5 trillion of the current trajectory and would get the American people back in a place where we can afford to be at this point. Time is running out, and for the president and the Senate Democrats to be banking on some notion that default would be blamed on Republicans, it's just pure nonsense. Again, we are the only ones that have passed legislation to actually raise the debt ceiling at this point. Enough is enough. The president needs to get back to the White House. No more trips abroad, no more beach weekends in Delaware. Let's roll up our sleeves and get to work to hammer out a deal in good faith. The American people deserve none less. And I will be happy to thank you very much for being here, and I'll be happy to take any of your questions.
Congressman, what would you say to people who point out that the national debt went way up under President Trump, and there was, Republican, I know you weren't out, Republican.
I wasn't in public office at that point. I think we've spent too much money for a long time, no matter who was in the White House. Our national debt has skyrocketed. We need, I believe this economy can take off like a rocket if we take some of the regulations away, we increase energy output, and get spending under control. This inflation, which has been the biggest tax increase on anybody, is eaten away at Americans' purchasing power. And we've had to spend an extraordinary sum of money because of a pandemic that has no parallel in American history. But the party's over. It's time to get, there's going to have to be a period of austerity following that level of spending. And to not acknowledge that you have to curb some of the spending that we've done in the last just the spending that's been in the last 2 years is extraordinary. Let alone what we spent in the immediacy of the pandemic. So it's time for us to get back to work. And we ran on a platform to get spending under control. We are working on doing just that. It's the Senate and the president that don't want to come to grips with the reality of the fact this is unsustainable, and this is how you collapse an economy and collapse a great country.
Last week, the governor said that she didn't believe upstate communities understood that as migrants came upstate, it wouldn't cost those communities money because there's federal monies that will follow them wherever they go. You disagree with that?
I've spoken with the governor. She's acknowledged that the federal pot of money is poppycock compared to what is really the raw cost. New York State's not getting $1 billion back that they're sending out of their own state budget to cover this. This is I feel bad for the governor in one respect. She didn't necessarily ask for this or legislate for this, but she's got to manage this now. This mayor, this was all fun and games when they wanted to say we're having sanctuary cities. We're not going to force federal law. You become a haven. Well, so every person that comes here, and the other. Notion that everyone here is this asylum seeker from a war-torn country, that's nonsense. We won't know until they actually go through a hearing. Now, they can apply for asylum, but they're getting hearing dates that are in 2028. And meanwhile, they just go about their business as people that are here with a presumption that they could maybe get asylum. Now, some of the people in Venezuela, they might qualify for asylum, but many of the people that are coming across the southern border don't. Yet they're coming here, and they're coming here in mass. We had the Remain in Mexico policy that really brought this down to a trickle. The pandemic kind of really slowed things down. And then once President Biden took office, it exploded with reckless abandon. And when they ask them, where do you want to go? They say New York, Chicago, LA. And because these are all sanctuaries. And they are all welcoming people with open arms, and now they're welcoming them to move upstate. Mayor Adams, who is, because consent decree on the city of New York, is responsible for the bill in perpetuity while these folks are here. to fund them. I mean, the governor herself told me that 40% of New York City's hotel rooms are filled with migrants at this point. I mean, that doesn't leave a lot for our tourist economy now, does it? But they are going to look for cheaper solutions because New York City will go, and they have people working right now to find places in upstate New York, and it's starting in the Hudson Valley, and you know it's coming west, to find cheaper solutions than housing the migrants in New York City. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out. It might cost $200, $250 a night to house them in a Midtown Manhattan hotel versus you could find some, some of our lower hotel stock that probably is pretty cheap comparatively. It makes areas of upstate New York, I particularly look at my district, the Southern Tier, and that's why so many of our county executives have called for emergency declarations to try to express the spirit of what they're hearing from the taxpayers of their communities, that they don't want this migrant crisis to come to our backyard. And because no one in Chemung County or Cattaraugus County or Chautauqua County, or frankly, I haven't heard anyone that I've met in Erie County say, I want this community to be a sanctuary city and not enforce federal laws. We have federal laws for a reason. They need to be followed.
When I've spoken with immigration services here in Buffalo, International Institute, for instance, they've said maybe the most impactful immediate thing that Congress could do is to allow these people to work in the interim while they apply for asylum. Is that something that you would consider? And if not, what are your concerns?
I mean, listen, I've talked to our ag community a lot about immigration. How do you have a comprehensive immigration reform? How do you pass a law to change anything about our current state of play in immigration when the current laws on the books aren't being enforced? I mean, it's the fact that President Biden seems to think that these laws are malleable. You could just ignore them. We could just let whoever the hell wants to come across the southern border come. It's really tough to say, hey, we're going to do a waiver. You can't do a waiver. You got to change the law. There's a 150-day waiting period for those that apply for asylum. Now, here's the deal. They might apply for asylum. They might not be entitled to asylum. But we won't find out until 27 or 28, the year 27 or 28, when they actually get a hearing in front of an immigration judge. Now, that begs the question. We need more immigration judges. That I would be all for. This is a comprehensive decision by the Biden administration to make the border this porous. This is intentional. This is not by accident. We've obviously had a glaring immigration problem for years that we have to solve and have an adult conversation about the future. But we can't do that until we secure our border. Having an open border, why bother with an immigration reform system when you're just going to let anyone in anyway? This isn't, this is a great country, immigrants. I'm the product of immigrants. I'm sure you are all products of immigrants. But this is not how you manage immigration in the United States of America. I mean, this is just lawlessness.
So not willing really to have the discussion about any of those?
I'm an open-minded person. I'll have a discussion with anybody, but I just think the reality of the fact that you got people that want to go change a pretty major immigration law. Meanwhile, everyone's just coming across the border. So, the reality is going to be, no. It's kind of like when the president wants to have a clean debt ceiling and say, well, maybe later we'll talk about spending reform. Well, once he gets what he wants, there's never going to be spending reform. We have to fix problems before we can solve new ones. They've created this new problem. This is where I have a real problem with those that are trying to shirk a little responsibility here. Some very powerful people on the other side of the aisle for me. Their voting record doesn't match their rhetoric right now. They have voted and enabled this open border culture that has just let this run rampant. You don't hear any critique of the president and his administration. And once Mayor Adams said something that was critical of the president, he got shut down. And he got banished from the surrogates list. You don't hear the governor criticizing the president and this ridiculous policy that's brought us here. You only hear the Republicans in the House pointing out the reality. Senator Schumer, he is absolutely absent in this discussion at this point. The entire Senate is, for that matter. So we have to solve the problem of the fact that we have no border security. we passed a starting point. Let's have a real live adult discussion. We passed H.R. 2. It's the House Republicans' border bill. We keep passing legislation. They have done nothing at the Senate level. And the president, all he does is threaten vetoes all day long. Because, again, ladies and gentlemen, this border policy is intentional.
So given that, the context of all that in terms of locally with people you represent and the other counties you represent declaring these state of emergencies, do you support that? Are you sort of in a mindset of just we're kind of an emergency here when it comes to the migrants?
I think you have to prepare for emergency. And, I'll tell you what, if our small rural schools get called in August and said, hey, make room for 40 new migrant families to move in, that is going to be an emergency for that school district. It's going to be an emergency for the social services department of our smaller rural counties that can't handle this. Erie County's a big county. I mean, county executive, obviously he's made his decisions. And I believe there's local control. Our local government's going to figure out what the policies are for the localities. But I definitely respect and support the counties that I represent that have almost all have passed the state of emergency because they need to have local ability to make swift and clear decisions. There's going to be a public health issue with this. Our hospitals, especially in the southern tier, are stretched to the max. Their budgets have been decimated. Somehow our poorest hospitals came out of COVID bankrupt, and the richest hospitals in New York City are cash flush because of the policies and the manipulation of Medicaid and other policies. So I certainly support and stand tall with our county leaders that have said that they want the emergency declaration in place in the event that this gets out of hand. By all accounts, we're going to see this come here if you haven't already. Yes.
Why didn't spending like that, like back in 20,
Back to the debt ceiling discussion? Yes.
back in 2017?
I wasn't in Congress in 2017. I just got elected last fall. So I was elected and I ran on a platform to get federal spending under control because we had spent $5 trillion in the last 2 years alone. And, we have crossed the threshold of $30 trillion in national debt. Now, we had to do what we had to do in 2019 into 2020 and 2021 at the height of this pandemic for emergency, response. We had unprecedented time when we shut down our economy. We told businesses they can't go to work. Many people were unemployed. That spending had to go up because we were in an unprecedented situation. But now that we're not, we have to get back to reality.
So what are you willing to accept with this bill? What are you willing
I think we have to get a spending increase is not going to we will not get a debt ceiling increase if the president doesn't concede that we have to lower spending. We have to lower the trajectory of spending. I haven't personally drawn any red lines. I want what I pledge is we have to bend the curve. Just like we talked about during COVID, we had to bend the curve from the peaks. Well, the peak has to have been last year in terms of spending. We need to now get the trajectory pointed in the right direction so we can make our economy much healthier than it is right now. We have a labor crisis. We have more jobs than we have people willing to work. There's clearly been programs in place that people are supporting themselves on when they could work. We need to get our able-bodied workforce back up and running. But we've gotten to the crisis moment in spending where the debt in the debt service in what it costs our country every year is dangerously high. The Congressional Budget Office came in and briefed members of Congress on both sides of the aisle together to talk about how this debt on our country will cost us $10 trillion over a decade. $10 trillion in what's in essence credit card interest. That's not fair to our next generations. And that's why the time to act is now. And frankly, this is the only moment in the rest of this administration, because we're about to get into silly season with the next election. This is the only moment that we will have the opportunity to bring real change, because everyone has to come to the table and negotiate in divided government this increase in the debt ceiling. So I don't think clean debt ceiling should have been passed in the past. I think having an assessment of where we're at as a people, where we're at in terms of our government financial portfolio. Should be done every time we get asked to raise a debt ceiling. So the president wants to kick this way beyond the 2024 election. We passed a debt ceiling increase. It would take us to next year at this time. He wants it longer. Well, that's going to require more spending, reform. We're not talking about deep cuts. We're talking about just holding the line. If you didn't get a raise year over year, you wouldn't have more money to spend. Only in the federal government are we allowed to print fake money and spend it. Our deficit could be as high as $1.5 trillion this year alone. I mean, that's not sustainable. A business couldn't run that way. The state couldn't run that way. The state has to balance a budget every year. The federal government mysteriously does not need to, because we have the ability to print money. And that has to stop, because we've devalued our currency, we've blown inflation out. But I got a little secret for you. The Fed has run out of runway in games to play to try to cool off the inflation, because they've raised interest rates 9 times. And now we're at a point where it's very punitive to the growth of our economy. So we have to get spending under control. Everyone understands that they have to get spending under control. But, Joe Biden's too worried about those on his extreme left in his own party to actually get the job done. I mean, the Joe Biden that once served in the U.S. Senate, that was good old Joe from Scranton, he'd have had this deal done already. He's changed. So is Senator Schumer.
Going back to immigration, you mentioned the rural areas. Don't they depend on migrant workers come every year to do jobs in America?
Through the H-2A program. Yeah, absolutely. But it's a highly regulated program that requires tons of paperwork, employee verification, document verification. We know who they are, what they are. And I support expanding H-2A visas. We need to expand H-2A visas to incorporate our dairy farms, because they're not seasonal, so they can't get in the mix on H-2A visas. We have to work on that program, but just like so many other things, because of what's gone on at the border, we're not able to have those serious adult conversations about comprehensive immigration reform. We have to have border security first, then we can go and have a legitimate bipartisan discussion about expanding some of these programs. But we desperately do need more H-2A workers. But the law is pretty clear right now, and these asylum seekers have to be here for 150 days before they're entitled to a work visa. And at the current state of affairs at the border, we're not going to get any legislation passed that allows for relaxation of that level.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but with the H-2A visas, if you previously crossed the border illegally, you're disqualified.
It's very tight. It's very tight, and that's why we know it's a safe, legal workforce, because it's kept track of. The state's involved in it. The farmers have to put tons of paperwork out there. We know they're paid a good, fair wage for their labor. That there's standards in place, and the farmers acknowledge to me that it's a complicated process, but it works out very well for them when they have enough. We need more. You certainly aren't filling those jobs by putting an ad in the paper. But at the same time, until we get the other pieces of this global discussion under control, we can't go in that direction.
So why not give it to the people who are coming in?
Again, the law states that they have to wait 150 days from applying for asylum in order to get a work visa. We don't know that they actually, depending on what country you're from, you might be entitled to asylum, you might not. Not every person, not American, that comes through the gate gets to be granted asylum. We decide that at the State Department level based upon the conditions in the country that they're fleeing. And but again, we aren't going to start granting work visas to people that just present themselves and have come into the country perhaps illegally. I mean, the backlog has got to be tackled right away. We need more judges. That's something I would support funding for tomorrow. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to fly to Washington. Thank you all for coming out here.